On an August evening in 1961, on the 47th floor of one of Manhattan's most luxurious hotels, Nelson Rockefeller stood at the window, staring at a photograph in his hand. It was a still from Marilyn Monroe's Something's Got to Give. But this wasn't just a fan's photograph. On the back, written in pencil, were notes that would chill anyone who read them. Project begins August 12th. Objective: complete control. Henry Kellerman, Nelson's assistant who was present that night, would later describe the moment with haunting clarity. There was a darkness in his eyes I'd never seen before. Marilyn Monroe was more than a woman to him. She was his Frankenstein, something he had created and was now losing control of. It all began in 1946. Norma Jean Baker was just 20 years old, one of thousands of beautiful girls knocking on modeling agency doors. When Emmeline Snively, owner of the Blue Book model agency, first saw her, she felt nothing special until the phone call came. The caller identified himself as William Garrett, a talent scout for the Rockefeller family. "We want that girl," he said simply. "Change her name, dye her hair, and wait." Snively's diary contained this haunting entry. "When I bleached Norma Jean's hair to platinum blonde, the girl looking back in the mirror wasn't Norma Jean anymore. It was as if someone else had emerged from within her." Marilyn Monroe was born, and that birth was paid for with Rockefeller money. By 1950, Marilyn was a rising star. But behind the curtain, her every move was being watched by Nelson Rockefeller. Documents found in Nelson's private archive revealed the extent of this obsession. Every week, Marilyn's psychological profile was updated. Who she met, what she ate, which books she read. Even her dreams were reported in detail. Dr. Ralph Greenson was known as Marilyn's psychiatrist. But according to the Rockefeller files, he was actually Nelson's agent. In Greenson's report to Nelson, dated March 14, 1955, he wrote, "The patient's intelligence level is higher than anticipated. She enjoys reading, shows interest in Dostoevsky and Freud. This intellectual curiosity could become problematic if not controlled." Nelson's response was brief and chilling. "Let her read, but we decide what she reads. Comic books instead of Kafka, fashion magazines instead of Freud." When Marilyn married Arthur Miller in 1956, Nelson flew into a rage. Miller was a known leftist intellectual who could cause Marilyn to deviate from the project. Nelson's diary from those days revealed his fury. "That Jewish communist is taking my creation from me. Marilyn belongs to me. I created her." During the Miller marriage, pressure on Marilyn intensified. Accidents occurred on film sets. Negative press stories appeared. The studio put her in impossible situations. The goal was to drive her away from Miller and bring Marilyn back under control. FBI files contained records that Marilyn's home was bugged. But this surveillance wasn't done by the FBI. It was Nelson Rockefeller's private team. Every night, Marilyn's phone conversations were recorded, and summaries were sent to Nelson. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more shocking revelations about Hollywood's darkest secrets. In a transcript of a recorded conversation from May 15, 1958, Marilyn told a friend, "Sometimes I feel like someone is watching me, controlling my every move. I don't know if I'm paranoid, but it's like my life isn't my own." Her friend tried to comfort her. "You're Marilyn Monroe. Everyone watches you." "No," Marilyn replied. "This is different. It's like I'm someone's toy." Nelson's note after listening to this conversation was revealing. "She's becoming aware, increase the dosage." By dosage, he meant the medications Dr. Greenson was giving Marilyn: barbiturates, amphetamines, sleeping pills. Marilyn's addiction wasn't accidental. It was a designed control mechanism. By 1960, Marilyn was starting to spiral out of control. Her affair with John F. Kennedy was the last straw for Nelson. Marilyn was no longer just a Hollywood star. She had become the center of a power struggle between America's most powerful families. The Kennedys and the Rockefellers were fighting a secret war for control of America. Marilyn, without realizing it, had become a battleground. In this war, JFK's interest in Marilyn drove Nelson to madness, because Marilyn was his creation, and now she was in the arms of his enemy. In a letter Nelson wrote to his brother David on February 7, 1961, "The Marilyn Project is out of control. The Kennedys are using her. If she talks, not just our Hollywood operation, but everything will be exposed. Immediate action required." David's response was even more concerning. "Perhaps it's time to terminate the project." But Nelson wasn't ready for that. His obsession with Marilyn had evolved beyond a business project into a personal fixation. He hired private detectives to track Marilyn's every moment. Reports even indicated that on some nights he would disguise himself and wait for hours outside Marilyn's home. Patricia Newcomb, Marilyn's close friend, said in an interview years later, "Marilyn constantly felt she was being followed. Sometimes she'd call me in the middle of the night saying, 'Pat, they're here again.' I'd look out the window but couldn't see anyone, but she could feel them." By 1962, the situation had reached critical mass. Marilyn had told Bobby Kennedy about the Rockefeller family's Hollywood operations. Bobby passed this information to his brother JFK. The White House began investigating the Rockefeller media empire. May 19, 1962, Madison Square Garden, JFK's birthday celebration. Marilyn's "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" performance is known worldwide. But what happened backstage that night remained hidden for decades. Nelson Rockefeller was among the guests. Before Marilyn went on stage, he was waiting for her backstage. According to eyewitnesses, Nelson approached Marilyn and whispered something in her ear. Marilyn's face went white as snow. Her hands began to tremble. The Marilyn who went on stage that night gave the sexy performance everyone remembers. But if you look at the close-ups, the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. What had Nelson told her? The answer was found in Nelson's diary. "I told her the truth, who she was, how she was created, and if necessary, how she could be destroyed." After that night, Marilyn's condition rapidly deteriorated. She was late to sets, forgot her lines, suffered paranoid episodes. The filming of Something's Got to Give ground to a halt. Fox Studio fired Marilyn. But this wasn't a normal firing. It was a decision made through the Rockefeller family's shares in Fox. The goal was to isolate Marilyn, leave her defenseless. August 4, 1962, was Marilyn's last day alive. When phone records from that day were examined, an interesting detail emerged. Marilyn had called Bobby Kennedy, but couldn't reach him. Then she called Peter Lawford, said goodbye. But there was another call that didn't appear in the records. At 7:47 p.m., a call was made from Marilyn's house to Nelson Rockefeller's private line. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Who was at Marilyn's house that night remains a mystery. Official records say she was alone, but neighbors' testimonies told a different story. A black limousine had waited outside the house for hours. Men in suits had entered and exited the house. When Marilyn Monroe was found dead the next morning, she was holding the phone receiver. Who she was calling was never discovered. But Nelson Rockefeller's first words that morning were recorded. "Project completed." The autopsy report contained anomalies that were never explained. The amount of Nembutal in Marilyn's blood was lethal, but there were no pill residues in her stomach. How had the drugs entered her system? The bruising on her body suggested she had been held down. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, changed her story 3 times about what happened that night. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who performed the autopsy, would later say, "I've always believed there was more to Marilyn's death than we were told. But every time I tried to investigate further, I was blocked from above." A week after Marilyn's death, her house was professionally cleaned. Every document, every diary, every piece of potential evidence disappeared. The cleaning company's invoice was paid by a shell corporation that, when traced, led back to Rockefeller Holdings. But Nelson's obsession didn't end with Marilyn's death. In his private files discovered after his own death in 1979, there were thousands of photographs of Marilyn. Not publicity shots, but private surveillance photos. Marilyn shopping, Marilyn at the beach, Marilyn through her bedroom window. Each photo was meticulously catalogued with dates, times, and notes about her emotional state. There was also a file labeled Project Marilyn Phase 2. Inside were plans to create another Marilyn, using the same techniques of transformation and control. Several young actresses' photos were included with notes about their potential, but the project was apparently abandoned after Marilyn's death became too controversial. One document stood out among the rest. It was a psychological analysis of Nelson himself, apparently commissioned by David Rockefeller to understand his brother's dangerous obsession. The psychiatrist concluded, "Subject exhibits signs of erotomania combined with delusions of ownership. He genuinely believes he created Monroe and therefore owns her. This psychosis is dangerous and could lead to extreme actions if the object of obsession attempts to break free." The report was dated July 15, 1962, less than 3 weeks before Marilyn's death. In 2009, a former CIA operative named Matthew Carlson came forward with explosive information. He claimed he had been part of a team assigned to clean up after Marilyn's death. According to Carlson, the overdose was staged. Marilyn had been injected with a lethal dose of barbiturates, then positioned to look like suicide. "We were told it was a matter of national security," Carlson said in his deathbed confession, "that Monroe had information that could destroy the country. But I knew the truth. It wasn't about national security. It was about one man's obsession that had gone too far." Carlson provided one final shocking detail. Nelson Rockefeller was there that night. Not in the house, but in the car outside, waiting when we signaled it was done. "I saw him through the window. He was crying." The interviews with Marilyn's friends painted an even more disturbing picture. Susan Strasberg recalled, "In her last weeks, Marilyn was terrified. She kept saying, 'He owns me. He'll never let me go.' When I asked who, she would just shake her head and say, 'The one who made me.'" Peter Lawford, who spoke to Marilyn on her last night, took the secret of their final conversation to his grave. But his wife Patricia Kennedy Lawford later revealed, Peter was devastated. He said Marilyn told him she was going to hold a press conference and reveal everything. About the Kennedys, yes, but more importantly, about who really controlled Hollywood. She said she had documents, proof. Peter tried to talk her out of it, but she was determined. Those documents were never found. But investigators discovered something curious. Marilyn's safety deposit box at the City National Bank of Beverly Hills had been opened and emptied on August 5, 1962. The day after her death, the signature on the access log was illegible. But the bank manager remembered a distinguished older gentleman with extraordinary persuasive abilities who claimed to be Marilyn's financial advisor. The manager later identified the man from a photograph. It was Nelson Rockefeller. Dr. Greenson, Marilyn's psychiatrist, committed suicide in 1979, just months after Nelson Rockefeller's death. He left behind a note, "I can no longer live with what I did to her. I was supposed to help her, but I destroyed her instead." Nelson promised it was for her own good, that we were protecting her from herself, but we were the ones she needed protection from. In Greenson's private papers, discovered after his death, were detailed instructions from Nelson about how to manipulate Marilyn's medication to control her behavior. Increase Nembutal when she becomes too independent, add amphetamines when she needs to perform. The goal is dependency, not cure. The true extent of the Rockefeller-Monroe connection only became clear when a construction crew renovating the Rockefeller Center in 1995 discovered a hidden room behind Nelson's former office. Inside were what investigators called the Marilyn Shrine. The walls were covered with her photos. There were recordings of her phone calls, films of her private moments, even strands of her hair in carefully labeled envelopes. Most disturbing was a mannequin dressed in one of Marilyn's actual gowns positioned in front of a mirror as if perpetually preparing for a performance that would never come. There was also a journal, written in Nelson's hand, that detailed his plans for Marilyn's future. He had intended to divorce his wife and marry Marilyn, making her the queen of American society. He wrote, "Together we will rule not just Hollywood, but America itself. A Rockefeller and his creation, his perfect woman, his Marilyn. The final entry, dated August 3, 1962, read, "She says she loves Kennedy. She doesn't understand that love is not hers to give. I created her capacity for love, directed it, controlled it. If she cannot love me, she will love no one." Joe DiMaggio, who truly loved Marilyn, once told his friend Morris Engelberg, "She was murdered, I'm sure of it. And I know who did it, but they're too powerful. If I said anything, I'd be next. So I just bring her flowers and tell her I'm sorry I couldn't protect her." For 20 years after Marilyn's death, DiMaggio had fresh roses delivered to her grave 3 times a week. He never remarried, never spoke publicly about her death. When asked why he remained silent, he simply said, "Some secrets are too dangerous to tell." The most chilling revelation came from Anna Rockefeller, Nelson's daughter, who broke the family's code of silence in 2019. In a private interview, she revealed, "My father was obsessed with Marilyn Monroe in a way that frightened all of us. He believed he was God, and she was his creation. When she started to break free, to think for herself, to love someone else, he couldn't bear it. He used to say, 'If I cannot have her, history won't have her either.'" Anna provided one final shocking piece of evidence: a recorded phone conversation between Nelson and David Rockefeller on August 4, 1962, at 11:47 p.m., just hours after Marilyn's death. Nelson: "It's done." David: "Are you certain there's no trail?" Nelson: "Everything has been handled. She's gone, but she'll live forever as I created her." David: "And the documents she had?" Nelson: "Recovered and destroyed. No one will ever know the truth." David: "What about the Kennedys?" Nelson: "They'll be dealt with in time. One problem at a time." 15 months later, JFK was assassinated in Dallas. Bobby Kennedy was killed in 1968. Both had been investigating the Rockefeller control of media and entertainment. Both had promised to expose the truth about Marilyn's death. The pattern was clear to those who dared to look. Anyone who got too close to the truth about Marilyn and the Rockefellers met with tragedy. Journalist Dorothy Kilgallen, who claimed to have Marilyn's murder diary, died of an overdose in 1965. Private investigator Fred Otash, who had bugged Marilyn's house, died in a car accident after announcing he would reveal what he knew. Even decades later, the curse continued. In 1985, author Anthony Summers was researching a book about Marilyn when his house mysteriously burned down, destroying years of research. He received a single phone call afterward. Some stories are better left untold. In 2010, a former Rockefeller employee named Sarah Mitchell came forward with one last piece of the puzzle. She had worked as a secretary in the Rockefeller offices in the 1960s and had accidentally discovered what she called the Marilyn Files. There were detailed plans for everything, she revealed: how to make her a star, how to control her relationships, how to use her to influence politics and culture. But the most terrifying part was the contingency plan. If she ever became a liability, there were exact instructions on how to eliminate the problem. The plan was codenamed Fallen Angel. The implementation date listed was August 4, 1962. Mitchell provided copies of documents that showed financial transfers, payment to doctors, photographers, journalists, and security specialists. Every aspect of Marilyn's life and death had been orchestrated, paid for, controlled by the Rockefeller machine. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. In 2015, a nurse named Betty Flynn, who had worked at the Rockefeller family's private medical facility, made a deathbed confession. She revealed that on August 5, 1962, Nelson Rockefeller had been brought in suffering from what appeared to be a complete nervous breakdown. "He kept saying her name over and over," Flynn recalled. "Marilyn, Marilyn, Marilyn." He said he had set her free, that she was his greatest creation and his greatest mistake. He asked for forgiveness. But I don't think he was asking God. He was asking her. Nelson Rockefeller never fully recovered from that night. Those close to him said he was haunted by Marilyn until his death in 1979. He died of a heart attack, officially. But his final words, according to his aide, were, "She's here. Marilyn's here. She's finally come for me." The truth about Marilyn Monroe and the Rockefeller obsession may never be fully known. Too many witnesses are dead, too many documents destroyed, too much power protecting too many secrets. But one thing is certain: Marilyn Monroe was not just a tragic Hollywood star who died too young. She was a pawn in a game of power, control, and obsession that reached the highest levels of American society. And perhaps, in the end, her death was not the tragedy. The tragedy was her life. A life that was never truly her own. An identity that was created, controlled, and ultimately destroyed by forces she never fully understood. Somewhere in Hollywood there's a statue of Marilyn Monroe, her dress blowing up in that famous pose. Tourists take pictures, thinking they're capturing an image of glamour and beauty. They don't know they're photographing a monument to possession, control, and the deadly price of being owned by those who believe they have the right to create and destroy human souls. The Marilyn Monroe the world loved never really existed. She was a character, a projection, a billion-dollar illusion created by the Rockefeller Empire. The real woman, Norma Jean Baker, died long before that August night in 1962. She died the moment Nelson Rockefeller decided to make her his masterpiece. And in the files, buried deep in Rockefeller archives that will never see daylight, there's reportedly one final document. It's a certificate of ownership, dated 1946, signed by Nelson Rockefeller. The property listed isn't a building or a company. It's a person, Norma Jean Baker. Purchase price her soul.